Hi everybody, I want to go over how to write successful introductions and conclusions. So I'm going to give you a few tips today. Hopefully this will be helpful. First of all, I want you to think of an introduction as a before snapshot and a conclusion as an after snapshot. So your reader, when they first start reading your essay, is not going to necessarily know a whole lot about your topic. After they've read your essay, they should know a lot more and have some opinions about it. So an introduction and a conclusion both serve a very different purpose than a body paragraph. And in many ways, they're very similar to each other. So think of them almost as bookends to a paper. In an introduction, you want to get your reader interested in the topic by using a hook. You're probably familiar with this term, and I'll give you some examples in a few minutes. You then want to provide your reader with a brief background on your topic, 2 to 3 sentences max, in case they aren't familiar with it. This shouldn't be a really long history of your topic or background. This is just enough to get them caught up so they can follow along with your paper. You're going to then clearly define your position on the topic. You're not going to ask your reader a question. You're going to give a thesis statement. And so we clearly know exactly what you think about this issue. For your conclusion, you're going to actually try to tie back to the hook that you used in your introduction, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then you're going to briefly remind your reader of the main points of your essay, and I put on there 2 sentences max. The reason for this is we've already read your paper. We don't need a very long summary at the end because we just finished reading it. So you're tying it up for us, you're concluding, but you're not completely restating everything. Finally, you're going to spend the bulk of your paper making the significance of your topic clear to the reader. In other words, we know what you told us, but we want you to remind us why it was so important, okay? Any of us could have gone and read an essay on pollution or crime in America, but why did you want us to read that? So here's some elements of your introduction. What is it that you should include? I mentioned beginning with a hook. This is a tool that's going to draw your reader's interest. So a hook can be a question, it can be a surprising statistic, it can be a quote, or it can be an anecdote or a personal example. An anecdote is like a short little story, maybe an example of my neighbor Joe, lives next door and whatever you want to say about Joe. After your hook, you're going to include some background information so that your reader can understand your argument, even if he or she is not familiar with your topic. I said don't overdo it, and I mentioned this in the last slide. The entire intro shouldn't be a history, so try to keep this to 2 to 3 sentences. Finally, you're going to transition to your thesis statement. So how does this background connect with a current problem, conversation, or issue? You don't want to be talking about pollution, for example, in 1960s, and then suddenly your next sentence say, we need to work on pollution today. Well, how did we get from the 1960s to 2017? And finally, you're going to clearly state your position in a 1-sentence thesis at the end of the intro. Remember, your thesis is not a question, it's a statement. Here's an example introduction I found online. I thought it was a strong one. It uses a hook. It says, how would you feel if you knew at this moment that some criminal is writing your name, address, and social security number on credit card applications and plans to charge thousands of dollars worth of merchandise on those credit cards? More importantly, how do you know that this is not happening? That's a pretty good hook. It brings the reader in and kind of makes them think about, well, I guess I don't, right? Then it gives a little bit of background. Millions of people have become victims of identity theft, and they often find out only after thousands of dollars have been stolen using their names. So that acts not only as a background, but as a transition to the thesis. And this is the thesis. Identity theft is a serious problem that claims millions of innocent victims, and the government must implement better regulations to help put an end to this crime. So this is a position. Somebody could have written something completely different and argued that consumers need to be more careful about where they share their information or something else, okay? So that's how we know this writer's position on the topic. Now let's talk about the elements of conclusion. What can you have there? Tie back to that hook that you used in your introduction. So, for example, if you asked a question, consider mentioning something to do with that. See the example intro and conclusion in the presentation to help you. I wrote a conclusion that uses that same question as the basis for the hook in the conclusion. Remind your reader of the main points of your essay, including your argument. Don't simply copy and paste your thesis again. They already read this, okay? So keep your summary brief. We want to, again, sum up the paper, but we don't want to simply restate everything we just said. That's boring, and we don't really need a conclusion if that's all we're going to do. You want to use the bulk of your conclusion to remind your reader of the importance of this issue so they really understand why it was important to talk about. So let's look at a sample. This is a conclusion for the paper that we just read an introduction for. Although it is scary to think about someone using your information to purchase something or benefit in some way, there are many ways to protect yourself. That tied right back to the hook from the introduction. Identity theft is a growing business for those who steal personal information, and individuals need to be aware of the dangers that are out there and where to turn if it happens to them. Just as important, governments need to strengthen current regulations and write new ones to keep up with the many ways that identity thieves are preying on victims. All of that was a restatement of the main points of the essay. Finally, how do we make this significant to the reader? If there are not strict legal consequences for these crimes, then society has no hope of preventing more of these crimes from happening or punishing those who commit them. That then makes it personal for the reader. They have some idea of what can be done to solve this problem.